The blizzard came down like God's fist. Through the white wall of swirling snow, Matthew Hayes saw the dark shape collapse. He'd been riding fence line, checking posts before the storm buried everything in this corner of Montana territory. February 1885. The wind howled like wounded wolves, tearing at his worn cavalry coat, freezing the breath in his lungs. Temperature dropping fast. Sky bruised purple-gray, pressing down on the valley like a lid on a pot ready to boil over. The barometer had dropped faster than he'd seen in years. Bad sign. A man caught in this would freeze before he could count to 500. Matthew had almost missed the figure. A dark smudge against endless white, wavering then folding at the knees. Gone. Near his boundary marker, perhaps 40 yards out. His good eye narrowed against the snow, confirming what he'd seen. Someone was out there. He didn't hesitate. Couldn't. Hesitation meant death in Montana winters. "Come on, Thunder," he urged his horse forward. The animal fought him briefly, wanting to return to shelter, but responded to the firm pressure of knees against flanks. 15 years together meant understanding without words. The wind cut through his layers, ice crusting his beard. Each breath burned, his right leg ached where the Confederate Millionaire ball had shattered bone at Antietam. Old wounds always sang in cold weather, a reminder of debts paid in blood. Matthew reached the fallen figure in seconds. A woman. Face down, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something that wasn't there. Fine leather coat soaked through, dark hair frozen to her neck. Too fine a coat for these parts. City clothes. Eastern clothes. He dismounted, ignoring the scream of pain from his bad leg. Pulled her up. Dead weight, but he felt shallow breathing. Still alive, but not for long in this cold. "Wasn't your day to die, ma'am," he muttered, hefting her across the saddle. "Not if I can help it." The storm swallowed them whole. Visibility zero. Matthew navigated by instinct and faith, counting fence posts he couldn't see, trusting Thunder to find home. His fingers were numb inside leather gloves. Bad sign. The cold would take digits first, then limbs, then life. His mind flashed back to Gettysburg, July 1863, dragging Lieutenant Collins through artillery fire after both his legs were taken by a cannonball. Same burning in his lungs then, same certainty that every step could be his last. But he'd gotten Collins to the field hospital. Man had lived, gone home to his wife in Ohio. Some instincts never left you. Some debts never got paid in full. The cabin appeared suddenly through the whiteness, a dark square against the endless white chaos. Matthew had built it himself after the bank took his family farm. Stone foundation, timber walls chinked with mud and horsehair. Small but solid, it would hold against anything the Montana sky could throw down. He kicked the door open, carried her inside, laid her near the stone fireplace. Her lips were blue, shivering violent, body fighting hypothermia and losing. He worked fast, built the fire high, hands shaking from cold and urgency. The kindling caught, then the split pine, flames licking upward. He stripped her wet coat, her boots, respectful but desperate. The coat was worth more than everything he owned. Fine European wool lined with fox fur, brass buttons with some family crest. Her dress underneath was equally fine, deep blue silk with intricate stitching. A dress for society parlors, not Montana wilderness. Matthew wrapped her in his only wool blanket, the one his mother had woven before the war. Before everything changed. The woman didn't wake, just shivered and shivered. He sat back against the wall, exhausted, watching her breathe. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, the fire caught, orange light dancing across rough timber walls. She was alive. That was enough for now. This land didn't forgive hesitation. You moved or you died. Matthew had moved. Now all he could do was wait. She woke to firelight and the smell of coffee. Bitter, strong, real. Her eyes opened slowly, disoriented. Her body ached like she'd been trampled. The room swam into focus. One room, rough-hewn timber, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding tin plates and not much else, a fireplace crackling warm, and a man sitting across from her, watching quietly. "Easy now," he said. His voice was low, graveled, like stones tumbling downstream. "Steady. You had a close call." She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her ribs. She gasped. "Careful," the man said, standing. He poured coffee from a dented pot, offered her a tin cup. "Ain't much, but it's warm." She took it, hands trembling. The heat felt like life returning. She sipped. It was terrible. Coffee burnt black. Oh yeah, strong enough to strip paint. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Where am I? Her voice came out raspy. My place. About 3 miles from Timberline. Storm still going. He gestured to the window. Outside, white fury continued unabated. Found you near my fence line. Been out nearly a day. A day? Her mind spun. He nodded, didn't push. Matthew Hayes, he said finally, placing a plate with beans and salt pork on the table. Simple food. He took half, left half for her. You got a name? She hesitated. If she told him who she really was, everything would change. It always did. Elizabeth, she said finally. Just that, nothing more. He nodded, accepting what she offered without demanding more. She noticed then the empty shelves, the patched roof, the worn Bible with no spine sitting by the narrow bed. He was sharing what little he had. Thank you, she said quietly. You'd have done the same. Matthew looked away, uncomfortable with gratitude. Elizabeth wasn't sure that was true. She'd never been tested like that. They ate in silence. Not awkward, companionable, like two people who'd survived something together. The storm kept on through the night. Matthew banked the fire, showed her how to keep it steady without wasting wood. She noticed his shirt, torn at the shoulder, patched badly. Let me, she said, reaching for her saddlebag that he'd rescued along with her. Found thread and needle, small things she carried. Tools from a life he knew nothing about. She mended the tear while he tended the fire. Neither spoke. Didn't need to. When she finished, she handed it back. Their fingers touched just for a moment. You didn't have to do that. You saved my life, Elizabeth replied. He looked at her then, really looked, with eyes that had seen too much. One blue, one slightly clouded, an old injury. I don't know if I would have stopped for a stranger in that storm, she added softly. Something passed between them, an understanding neither could name. Elizabeth touched the locket at her throat. Gold, engraved with the Prescott family crest, worth more than this entire cabin. She hid it quickly when Matthew glanced over. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Morning came, pale light filtering through the single window. Elizabeth woke to find Matthew already up, stoking the fire, making more of that terrible, wonderful coffee. On the rough shelf beside his bed, she noticed something unexpected. Books. A small collection, worn and well-read. Thoreau's Walden, Emerson, Shakespeare. Not what she expected from a frontier rancher. You read philosophy, she asked. A shadow of self-consciousness crossed his weathered face. Man needs to feed his mind, same as his body. She picked up Walden, opened to a marked passage. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. You agree with him? She asked. Matthew considered, pouring coffee. Some men, not all. Some find purpose even in desperate times. She wondered what desperate times he'd known. The evidence was there in his cabin, the patched clothes, the single tin plate, the cavalry coat hanging by the door. Blue, not gray, the slight limp when he walked, favoring his right leg. You were Union? She asked. His face went still. Yes, ma'am. 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry. The war's been over 20 years. Some things don't end when the shooting stops, he said quietly, handing her coffee. You from around here, Elizabeth? The way he said her name made it sound like something precious, something true. Timberline, she answered, not exactly lying. That explains the coat. He nodded to her expensive garment, now drying by the fire. Not many folks in these parts can afford European wool and real silver buttons. She hadn't realized he'd noticed such details. My father is comfortable, she admitted. He'll be worried. Yes, but she didn't elaborate further. Outside, the storm finally broke, leaving the world clean and quiet, like a second chance written in snow. Dawn came cold and bright. Storm's broken, Matthew said. You'll want to get back before another rolls in. Elizabeth nodded, though part of her didn't want to leave. This cabin, rough, poor, honest, felt safer than her father's mansion ever had. They ate together one last time. More beans, weak coffee. Can I ask you something, Elizabeth said. Matthew looked up. How'd you end up here alone like this? He was quiet a long moment. Then he spoke slow and careful, like a man unused to telling his story. Lost my folks' land to debt 5 years back. After the war, taxes went up. Bank interest too. Father died from consumption in '79. Mother followed 6 months later. Brother never came home from Antietam. His hand unconsciously moved to his right leg, I took a mini ball same day, tore through the bone. Doctors wanted to take the leg. I refused. He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred. Bank took everything. 20 acres my grandfather cleared with his own hands. House my father built. Now I work another man's cattle, live on the edge of his property. His jaw tightened. Town folk call me worthless. Landowners won't give me the time of day. He looked up, met her eyes, but I got my word, and a man's word is all the wealth he needs. Elizabeth felt something break inside her. This man, this good, decent man, had nothing, and he'd still saved her, still shared his last meal. She almost told him then, almost said, "I'm Elizabeth Prescott. My father owns the bank that probably took your land. I could change your life." But fear stopped her cold. What if he changed? What if this kindness, this beautiful, simple kindness, was only real because he didn't know who she was? "If I could repay you," she started. Matthew shook his head. "You don't owe me nothing. That's what neighbors do." She stood, gathered her things. He'd saddled a horse for her, one of two he owned, lending it without asking for return. At the door, she turned back. "Thank you, Matthew. You let me be the kind of man I want to be, Elizabeth," he said quietly. "That's payment enough." Elizabeth mounted the horse, the cold bit through her coat. She turned once, looked back at the cabin. Matthew stood on the porch watching. Their eyes held, something unspoken passing between them, something fragile and real. Then she rode away. Her hand touched the locket. The secret felt heavier now, like a stone she couldn't put down. Rich or poor, a blizzard buried all the same. But afterward, the world remembered who you were, and Elizabeth wasn't sure she wanted to be that person anymore. Samuel Prescott stood at the window of his study, watching the snow fall on his 20-acre estate, the finest house in Timberline, maybe in all of Montana territory. 3 stories of Victorian splendor, with curved glass imported from Philadelphia, furnishings from New York, and staff from San Francisco. A monument to wealth amassed during the war, supplying the Union Army with everything from boots to bullets. "Any word?" he asked, not turning around. James Sullivan, his business partner, stood behind him, hat in hands. At 45, Sullivan was 15 years younger than Prescott, ambitious, with the hungry look of a man who'd tasted prosperity but wanted more. "Nothing yet, sir. The men are searching every farm and homestead within 20 miles. But the storm, I don't care about the storm." Samuel turned, face hard as the granite in his fireplace. "My daughter has been missing for nearly 2 days. Find her." "Yes, sir." Sullivan hesitated. "The engagement announcement—" "Can wait until she's found," Samuel snapped. The newspaper had been ready to announce the engagement of Elizabeth Prescott to James Sullivan, merging the 2 largest financial interests in the territory, an arrangement that would benefit both men enormously. If only his headstrong daughter would cooperate. Samuel looked back at the snow. Sarah would have known how to handle Elizabeth. Sarah, his wife, dead these 15 years from consumption, taking with her all the softness in his world, leaving him with a daughter too much like her mother. Idealistic, stubborn. "Tell Harkins if he doesn't find her by tomorrow, he's fired. Tell them all. No one sleeps until my daughter is home." Sullivan nodded, backing from the room. Samuel stared at the portrait above the mantel. Sarah in her wedding dress, Elizabeth as a child beside her. Before the coughing started, before the blood on handkerchiefs, before he buried his heart in a pine box and turned to the only comfort left, building an empire nothing could tear down. "Where are you, girl?" he whispered to the snow. News traveled faster than wildfire in a town with nothing better to burn. Elizabeth returned to her father's estate 3 hours later, riding Matthew's old mare. The ranch hands found her first, relieved, then anxious when they saw the unfamiliar horse. Within an hour, the whole territory knew. The Prescott heiress had been rescued by Matthew Hayes. That broke rancher, the one with no land, no prospects, no future worth mentioning. Town split clean down the middle. Some folks admired Matthew's courage. "Takes a real man to ride into a storm like that," Judge William Davidson said at the Mercantile, loud enough for everyone to hear. The old Union judge had lost an arm at Shiloh, but gained respect from both sides for his fairness in land disputes. Risked his life for a stranger. "That's what we fought for." Others mocked him. "Probably thought he'd get a reward," sneered James Sullivan, leaning against the post office. "Maybe marry up. That's what poor men do, wait for opportunity." Elizabeth heard the talk, It made her sick. She tried to send a thank you gift. Quality tools, winter supplies, things Matthew actually needed, sent with her father's ranch hand, orders to deliver it quiet. Matthew refused it publicly. Happened at the Mercantile Saturday afternoon. Whole town watching. The ranch hand arrived with the wagon. Matthew was there buying grain he could barely afford. Miss Prescott sends her thanks, the hand said, gesturing to the tools. Says you earned them. Matthew looked at the tools. Good steel. Months of wages sitting there. He shook his head. I didn't do it for pay. Take them back. The crowd went silent. Then James Sullivan spoke up. Sullivan was everything Matthew wasn't. Wealthy, educated, entitled. He'd been courting Elizabeth for 2 years, assuming eventually her father would see reason and arrange the match. Mighty convenient, Sullivan said, smiling cold. You being there when she needed saving. Matthew turned slowly, his jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. Ain't nothing convenient about a blizzard. Sullivan stepped closer. She belongs with her own kind, Hayes, not with charity cases. The Mercantile held its breath. Matthew met Sullivan's eyes. I reckon she belongs with whoever treats her like a person, not property. He paid for his grain, walked out. The tools sat there on the wagon untouched, refused. Gold didn't keep you warm in a storm. Only fire and heart did that. But gold sure made people mean afterward. Matthew rode home alone. The tools stayed in town. Proof of the divide wealth created. On his porch, Matthew sat and watched the sunset. The mountains burned orange and purple. Beautiful and indifferent. He thought about Elizabeth. Wondered if she'd heard what Sullivan said. Wondered if it mattered. Probably didn't. Rich folk and poor folk. They didn't mix. Never had, never would. But for one day during a storm, none of that had mattered. And Matthew couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd mended his shirt, the care in her hands, the quiet between them that felt like home. He went inside, closed the door. Outside, the cold settled in. Elizabeth stood in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the imported mirror. She barely recognized herself. 2 days in a simple cabin had changed something fundamental, or perhaps merely revealed what was already there. The door opened. Her father entered without knocking, as was his custom. You had the entire county searching for you, Samuel said. No embrace, no relief, just an accusation. What were you thinking, riding out in that weather? I needed space to think, Elizabeth replied. The storm came faster than I expected. You could have died. I nearly did. Matthew Hayes saved my life. Samuel's face hardened at the name. Yes, the vagrant. I've heard. He's not a vagrant. He works Judge Wilson's cattle, has his own cabin. On borrowed land, man lost his family farm. Poor management. Elizabeth turned, anger flaring. Poor management? The banks raised interest rates after the war. Men who fought came home to find their families drowning in debt. That's what happened to Matthew's family. Samuel waved a dismissive hand. Business is business. The weak fail, the strong survive. Is that what Mother would say? Elizabeth knew it was unfair, using Sarah against him. But she'd seen the look in Matthew's eyes when he spoke of losing his family land. The same land his grandfather had cleared by hand. Samuel stiffened. You will not speak of your mother in this context. She taught me compassion, to see people as people, not assets or liabilities. Compassion doesn't build empires. Samuel moved to the window, looked out at his estate. I've worked too hard, come too far, to watch you throw everything away on some romantic notion about a penniless cowboy. I'm not throwing anything away. He saved my life, and I simply wanted to thank him properly. You sent him tools worth a month's wages. He deserved them. He refused them, publicly embarrassed our name. Elizabeth frowned. What? Your hero made quite a show of rejecting Prescott charity this afternoon. The entire town witnessed it. Samuel turned back to her. Sullivan was there. He said Hayes behaved like he was above accepting help. Pride, the last refuge of the truly destitute. Elizabeth sat on the edge of her bed. Matthew had refused her gift, not because he didn't need it, but because, what? Because it came from her? Because he learned who she really was? The engagement announcement goes in the paper Monday, Samuel continued. You will marry Sullivan this spring. The arrangements are made. I never agreed to marry him, Elizabeth said quietly. This isn't about agreement. This is about securing our family's position. Sullivan has connections in Washington. Together you'll inherit the largest financial empire in the territory. I don't love him, Samuel laughed, a short, bitter sound. Love? Your mother loved me. Look what good it did her, buried at 42. He moved to the door. Rest, you've had an ordeal. Sullivan will call tomorrow. You will receive him properly. The door closed behind him. Elizabeth sat motionless, staring at nothing. Then her eyes fell on her riding boots, still caked with mud and snow. She made a decision. She would see Matthew again. She needed to understand why he'd refused her gift. Needed to know if he'd changed now that he knew her name. The next morning she rose before dawn. Before her father could stop her, before she could stop herself, Elizabeth saddled her horse quietly, slipped out through the back gate. The ranch hands pretended not to see. They liked her, knew she was different from her father. The ride to Matthew's place took an hour. Sunrise caught her halfway, pink and gold spilling across the mountains, making the snow glitter like broken stars. She found him in the corral mending fence. He looked up when he heard hooves. Surprise flickered across his face, then something warmer. He set down his tools, wiped his hands on his pants. "Wasn't expecting company," Matthew said. "I wanted to thank you properly," Elizabeth said, dismounting, "since you wouldn't take the tools." "Told you, don't need thanks." "I know," she stepped closer, "but I wanted to see you again." That hung between them. Honest, raw. Matthew nodded toward the cabin. "Coffee's on." They walked together. Elizabeth watched him move. Economical, purposeful, no wasted motion. A man who'd learned to make do with little. Inside, she looked around properly this time, saw the details. The hand-carved chair, the shelf holding 3 books, the window facing east to catch morning light. "You built this yourself?" she asked. "Most of it. Took 2 years. Elizabeth ran her hand along the table. Smooth, solid. "It's beautiful." Matthew poured coffee. They sat across from each other, like they had during the storm. "Why did you refuse the tools?" she asked. "You could have used them." "Didn't want folks thinking I helped you for gain." His eyes met hers. "Some things should be done because they're right, not because there's reward." "Not everyone thinks that way." "Not everyone spent 4 years watching men die for something they believed in," he said quietly. "Changes how you see things." Elizabeth nodded. "My father thinks I'm being foolish. Says I've romanticized you because you saved me." Matthew's face gave nothing away. "And have you?" "No." She looked down at her coffee. "I think I see you clearly. That's why I'm here." "What do you dream about?" she asked suddenly. Matthew blinked. "What? When you're out here mending fence, riding alone, what do you dream about?" He was quiet a long time. "Used to dream about land, having my own place again, passing it to my kids someday." He looked at his coffee. "Now I just want to be the kind of man worth remembering. That's enough." Elizabeth felt something crack open inside her. Here was a man with nothing, dreaming only of being good. "You don't know who I am," she said quietly. Matthew looked at her. "I know enough. I know you mended my shirt. I know you weren't afraid to work beside me during the storm. That's plenty." She wanted to tell him then, wanted to confess everything. The wealth, the expectations, the cage her life had become. But Matthew stood, gestured to the corral. "Come on, I'll show you something." They walked outside. The sun was higher now, warming the air. Matthew led her to the fence line, showed her the cattle grazing below. "Not mine," he said, "but I take care of them like they are. That matters." They stood there, shoulders almost touching. Elizabeth looked at him, really looked. Saw the lines around his eyes from squinting at sun and snow, the scar on his jaw, the quiet strength in the way he stood. "Matthew." He turned. Their faces were close, too close. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Matthew stepped back. "I should get back to work." Elizabeth nodded, throat tight. "I should go." They walked to her horse in silence. She mounted, looked down at him. "Thank you for everything." "Anytime, Miss Prescott." She rode away, didn't look back. But on the ridge, her father's men were watching, 2 riders, dark against the sky. Elizabeth saw them, her stomach dropped. This wasn't over, not by half. A woman who wasn't afraid of hard work was rarer than water in August. But a woman who defied her father's will, that was dangerous. And Elizabeth had just stepped over a line she couldn't uncross. The 2 men watched her ride back toward town, then looked at each other. Sullivan had paid them well to follow her, to report back. One of them took out a small notebook, wrote down the time and place. Evidence, ammunition. The kind that destroyed reputations. In the distance, Matthew returned to mending his fence, unaware that the simple act of sharing coffee with Elizabeth Prescott had set events in motion that would soon engulf them both. Some storms came from the sky, others from the hearts of men. Both could kill just the same. Timberline wasn't a big town, barely 500 souls. But like any place where humans gathered, Invisible lines divided it as surely as property stakes marked the land. The north side belonged to merchants and bankers, their Victorian houses set back from wide streets. The south side housed laborers, ranch hands, and those whose fortunes had turned with the war. Between them stood the mercantile, the church, and the Red Eagle Saloon, neutral ground where the divisions blurred after sundown. Monday morning found the mercantile crowded. Fresh supplies had arrived from Helena, drawing folks from across the county. Judge William Davidson stood near the counter, his empty left sleeve pinned neatly to his side, remnant of a rebel shell at Shiloh. At 65, the judge remained straight-backed and clear-eyed, his silver hair and beard giving him the look of an Old Testament prophet. 4 pounds of coffee beans, he told Carl Weber, the German immigrant who ran the store, and whatever letters came on the stage. Weber nodded, measuring coffee into a paper sack. Heard about the Prescott girl, Judge? Found half frozen in the storm. I heard. Davidson's voice revealed nothing. That Hayes fellow pulled her out, rode into the teeth of it to get her. The judge's eyebrow lifted slightly. Matthew Hayes, the veteran who works Wilson's place? The very same. Man's got sand, I'll give him that. The bell above the door jingled. Conversation died as James Sullivan entered, removing his beaver hat, brushing snow from his tailored coat. 4 ranch hands followed, Prescott men by their gear. Sullivan noticed Davidson and nodded slightly, the gesture falling short of respect. Judge, fine morning. Sullivan. Davidson received the greeting without warmth. The 2 men had crossed swords before in land court, Sullivan representing Prescott interests that often seemed to expand at the expense of struggling homesteaders. Sullivan approached the counter, handing Weber a list. Mr. Prescott's monthly order. Yes, sir, Mr. Sullivan. Weber took the list, his manner changing, becoming more deferential. Behind Sullivan, the ranch hands spread through the store, their presence filling the space, pushing others to the edges. Coffee's gone up again, Weber said. Supply problems from Brazil. Mr. Prescott pays the listed price from last month's contract, Sullivan replied. Fluctuations in the market are your concern, not his. Weber flushed but nodded. Everyone knew Prescott credit kept half the businesses in town afloat. Davidson watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. The law of contracts cuts both ways, Sullivan. A merchant has the right to fair compensation. Sullivan turned, smiling without humor. Legal advice is always welcome, Judge. But I believe Mr. Weber and Prescott Enterprises understand each other perfectly. The bell jingled again. Matthew Hayes entered, stamping snow from his boots. The room stilled further. Hayes wore his usual worn cavalry coat, patched trousers, and a week's worth of beard. His clouded right eye caught the light as he scanned the room, stopping briefly on Sullivan before moving to the counter. Morning, Carl, he said quietly. Need grain for my horses, 20 pounds. Weber nodded, nervous now with both men at his counter. Right away, Mr. Hayes. Sullivan watched Matthew with the detached interest of a man observing an unusual insect. Hayes, town's talking about your heroics. Quite the coincidence, finding the Prescott heiress. Matthew turned slowly. Wasn't looking for anyone, just saw someone needed help. Of course. Sullivan's smile remained fixed. Very noble. Elizabeth was quite impressed by your rustic hospitality. The ranch hands chuckled. Matthew's face remained impassive, but his good eye hardened. Miss Prescott was a respectful guest. Didn't complain about the accommodations. Yes, well, she's always been charitable toward the less fortunate. Sullivan's voice carried through the store. She sent you a token of appreciation, I believe. She did, which you refused, publicly. Matthew met Sullivan's gaze. Didn't do it for reward. No? Sullivan stepped closer. What did you do it for then? Surely not just from the goodness of your heart. Judge Davidson moved between them, his presence creating space. I'd say saving a life needs no justification, Sullivan. Most men who served understand that. Sullivan's jaw tightened at the implied insult. He'd spent the war managing his father's business interests, never donning a uniform. Enlightening as this conversation is, gentlemen, I have business to attend to. Sullivan collected his hat. Hayes, I'm sure Elizabeth appreciates your discretion regarding her time in your care. A lady's reputation is a delicate thing. The threat hung in the air, clear as a coiled snake. Matthew's voice remained level. A true gentleman protects a lady's honor, not questions it. The mercantile collectively held its breath. Sullivan's face flushed, but he recovered quickly. Indeed, good day, gentlemen. As Sullivan and his men exited, Davidson turned to Matthew. That man has the moral compass of a wolverine. Matthew nodded, paying Weber for the grain. Doesn't matter. Got nothing he wants. Don't be so sure. Davidson watched through the window as Sullivan mounted his horse. You've got his attention now. That's rarely a blessing. Matthew hefted the sack of grain. Judge, with respect, I've faced Confederate artillery. Sullivan doesn't worry me much. Davidson's weathered face creased in a smile. Artillery announces itself, son. Men like Sullivan strike from blind sides. He adjusted his hat with his remaining hand. Where did you serve? 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry. Mindy's Sabres. Davidson nodded with respect. Hard fighting at Chickamauga. Yes, sir. Lost a lot of good men there. The judge studied him. You know, Hayes, I could use a man with your background. My clerk left for California last month. Position's open if you're interested. Pays better than cowhand work. Matthew looked surprised. Appreciate the offer, Judge, but I'm not much for paperwork. Think about it. Town could use more men who ride into storms rather than away from them. Davidson collected his coffee. Good day, Hayes. Outside, Matthew secured the grain to his saddle, mind turning over the exchange. The offer was unexpected. Clerk to the county judge would mean steady work, respect, a future beyond subsistence. But it would also mean town life, politics, choosing sides in the invisible war that divided Timberline. He mounted his horse, unaware that across the street, Sarah Davidson watched from her father's office window. The judge's daughter had observed the entire mercantile scene. At 25, Sarah had her father's direct gaze and her dead mother's auburn hair. Unmarried by choice rather than lack of suitors, she helped manage her father's affairs, both legal and personal. Sarah saw Matthew ride away, his solitary figure growing smaller against the snow-covered mountains. Then she turned to the documents spread across her desk. Land transfers, banknotes, tax liens, pieces of a puzzle her father had been assembling for months. A pattern of foreclosures spreading across the county like a stain. All roads leading back to Prescott Enterprises and James Sullivan. Elizabeth Prescott sat in her father's study, back straight, hands folded in her lap as she'd been taught since childhood. Across the desk, Samuel Prescott reviewed documents, deliberately making her wait. The massive oak desk, imported from Boston at considerable expense, served as both physical and psychological barrier between them. The announcement will run in tomorrow's paper, Samuel said finally, not looking up. Sullivan has already ordered champagne from San Francisco for the engagement dinner next week. I haven't agreed to marry him, Elizabeth said quietly. This isn't about agreement, Samuel set his pen down. This is about duty to your family name. Is it my duty to marry a man who treats others like Sullivan does? Elizabeth leaned forward. You should have heard him at the mercantile, humiliating Matthew Hayes publicly after he saved my life. Samuel's face hardened. Hayes is a failed farmer who couldn't manage his inheritance. Sullivan is building an empire, with your money and influence, with vision and ambition. Samuel stood, moving to the window. Your mother would have understood the necessity of this union. My mother would have seen Sullivan for what he is. And what is that? Elizabeth met her father's gaze. A man who measures everything and everyone by their financial value. A businessman, you mean? Samuel's voice cooled further. Like your father. You weren't always like this, Elizabeth's voice softened. Before Mother died, you cared about people, not just profits. Samuel turned away sharply. Sentimentality is luxury for those who don't bear responsibility. A knock interrupted them. The housekeeper entered, nervous. Mr. Sullivan has arrived, sir. Show him in. Samuel straightened his vest. Elizabeth, you will be cordial. This discussion is finished. James Sullivan entered with the confident stride of a man accustomed to ownership. He carried a small velvet box and a bouquet of hothouse flowers that must have cost a small fortune to obtain in February, Montana. Samuel, the men shook hands. Elizabeth, you look radiant today. Elizabeth nodded without speaking. Sullivan didn't seem to notice her coolness, placing the flowers on the desk. I've brought something else as well. He opened the velvet box, revealing a diamond ring that caught the winter light in the cold fire. A token of our future together. It's beautiful, she said mechanically. It belonged to my grandmother. Sullivan women have worn it for 3 generations. He removed it from the box. May I? Before Elizabeth could respond, he took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. It felt heavy, restrictive, a beautiful shackle. Perfect fit, Sullivan smiled, as if it were meant to be. Samuel watched with approval. James has also brought news about the Washington contract. The territorial governor has recommended our bid for the Army's supply contract. 5 years of guaranteed business, Sullivan added. Military outposts across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Prescott Sullivan Enterprises will be the largest commercial venture in the territory. Congratulations, Elizabeth said, eyes on the ring that now bound her to this future. I thought we might announce it at the engagement dinner, Sullivan continued. The governor has agreed to attend. Several territorial legislators as well. Samuel nodded. Excellent. Elizabeth, perhaps you should show James the preparations for the dinner. The dismissal was clear. Elizabeth rose, preceding Sullivan into the hallway. When they were alone in the formal dining room, Sullivan grasped her arm, turning her to face him. You seem distracted today. It's been a difficult week. His fingers tightened slightly. I heard you visited Hayes again, after your father expressly forbade it. Elizabeth stiffened. You've been having me followed? I've been protecting your reputation. Sullivan's voice lowered. Do you have any idea how it looks? The Prescott heiress visiting a bachelor's cabin unchaperoned? He saved my life and has been amply thanked, yet you persist in seeking his company. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. People will talk. Let them. His grip tightened further. Your father has worked his entire life building this family's position. I won't let you jeopardize that because of some romantic notion about a penniless cowboy. Elizabeth pulled away. You sound exactly like my father. I take that as a compliment. Sullivan straightened his jacket. Your father understands the world as it is, not as idealists wish it to be. Hayes is nothing, a relic of a war long finished. A man who couldn't even keep his family land. You know nothing about him. I know everything about him, Sullivan countered. I make it my business to know the history of everyone in this county. Matthew Hayes, 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry, wounded at Antietam. Family farm foreclosed by a Montana Territorial Bank in 1880 for failure to meet loan obligations. Currently employed by Judge Wilson as a ranch hand at $30 monthly. Elizabeth stared at him, unsettled by the clinical recitation. I also know, Sullivan continued, that this fascination with him will end. Now your future is with me, and the sooner you accept that reality, the happier we'll all be. The threat behind his words was unmistakable. Are you threatening me, James? I'm clarifying expectations. His smile returned, cold and practiced. Now shall we discuss the dinner menu? I've taken the liberty of ordering French wine. 1871 Bordeaux, an excellent year. Elizabeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. In Sullivan's eyes, she saw not love or even desire, but calculation. The same look he might give a promising investment or a business acquisition. Matthew spent the afternoon mending fence line on the western edge of Judge Wilson's property. Repetitive work that allowed his mind to wander. He thought about Judge Davidson's offer. Clerk work would mean regular hours, sleeping in the same bed each night, perhaps saving enough to buy a small plot of land someday. He thought about Elizabeth Prescott, the way she looked riding away from his cabin that morning, straight-backed and determined. The quiet understanding that had grown between them during the storm. How different she seemed from her father and his world. The sound of approaching riders pulled him from his thoughts. 2 men on horseback, Prescott hands by their gear. Matthew recognized them from town. Boyd and Miller. Both had served with Confederate cavalry during the war. Neither had ever shown him anything but contempt. Hayes, Boyd called as they approached. Taking a break from hero work? Matthew set down his tools. Something I can help you boys with? Just passing through, Miller said. But neither made any move to pass. Checking fence lines, same as you. Prescott land is 3 miles east, Matthew observed. Boyd smirked. Mr. Sullivan asked us to survey adjoining properties. Seems Mr. Prescott is considering buying Wilson's spread. Matthew's face revealed nothing, though the news hit hard. Judge Wilson was elderly, had been talking about returning east to live with his daughter. If Prescott bought the land, Matthew would be out of work and home. Wilson hasn't mentioned selling. Man his age, health failing. Miller shrugged. Makes sense to cash out while he can. That's his business. Matthew returned to his work, driving a staple into the fence post with more force than necessary. Sure is, Boyd leaned on his saddle horn. Hear you've been entertaining visitors lately. Miss Prescott seems mighty interested in your hospitality. Matthew straightened, meeting Boyd's gaze. Say what you came to say. Just friendly advice. Boyd's voice hardened. Miss Prescott is engaged to Mr. Sullivan. Woman like that don't belong with a man like you. That her opinion or Sullivan's? Smart man would watch his mouth, Miller cut in, and his back. Smart man would deliver his message and ride on, Matthew replied evenly, before this becomes something none of us wants. The 3 men stood frozen for a long moment. Old hatreds from a war supposedly long ended, simmering just below the surface. Finally, Boyd nodded. Message delivered. Enjoy the view while you can, Hayes. This won't be your home much longer. They wheeled their horses and rode off. Matthew watched them go, mind churning. The threat was clear enough. Stay away from Elizabeth Prescott. The news about Wilson's ranch might be true or merely bait. Either way, the ground was shifting beneath his feet. He finished the fence repair and mounted his horse. Instead of heading back to his cabin, he turned west, toward town. Judge Davidson's offer deserved consideration now that his current position seemed less secure. The ride gave him time to think about choices and consequences, about the path that had led him here, the war that had taken his brother and his leg, the hard years after, trying to save the family farm while his parents' health failed, the foreclosure that had left him with nothing but his horse and his name. Timberline came into view as afternoon shadows lengthened. Matthew rode directly to the courthouse, a solid brick building at the north end of town. He tied his horse and climbed the steps, favoring his right leg slightly after the long day's work. Inside, he found Sarah Davison alone, organizing documents in the main office. She looked up, surprised at his entrance. Mr. Hayes, can I help you? Looking for your father, ma'am. He mentioned a clerk position. Sarah set down her papers. He's in court until 4. You're interested in the position? Considering it. Matthew removed his hat, suddenly aware of his work clothes and unshaven face in the formal setting. Sarah studied him with intelligent eyes. It's mostly record-keeping. Land transactions, legal filings, court schedules. Father needs someone who can write a clear hand and understand basic legal language. My education's limited, but I can read and write well enough. She gestured to a chair. May I ask why you're interested? Father mentioned you work for Judge Wilson. Matthew hesitated, then decided on honesty. Heard Wilson might be selling his place to Prescott. Nothing certain, but seems wise to consider options. Sarah's expression changed subtly. When did you hear this? Today. Prescott's men mentioned it. She moved to a filing cabinet, withdrew a folder. Did they say when this sale might occur? No, ma'am, just that Wilson's health was failing and he might want to cash out. Sarah opened the folder, scanning documents inside. Judge Wilson visited this office 3 days ago. He showed no signs of failing health, nor mentioned any intention to sell. Matthew absorbed this. Could be just talk then. Perhaps, she replaced the folder, or it could be part of a pattern we've been observing. We, my father and I, Sarah leaned forward slightly. Mr. Hayes, what do you know about recent land transactions in this county? The question seemed odd. Not much. Know the railroad's been buying up plots along the proposed northern route. And who represents the railroad's interests locally? Prescott Enterprises, I suppose. Sarah nodded. Over the past 18 months, Prescott and Sullivan have acquired 17 properties in this county. Most belong to war veterans or their widows, all foreclosed by Montana Territorial Bank. Matthew tensed. Same bank that took my family's land. The very same, Sarah's voice lowered. A bank in which Samuel Prescott holds controlling interest, though his name appears nowhere in the public records. The implications settled like lead in Matthew's stomach. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything yet. Father and I are gathering evidence. She studied him carefully. Your land was foreclosed in 1880? August 15th. Do you still have the loan documents? The original terms? Matthew shook his head. Bank took everything. Said we were 3 months behind on payments. But my father kept careful records. We'd paid on time. The office door opened, and Judge Davidson entered, removing his judicial robes. He stopped short, seeing Matthew. Hayes, didn't expect to see you so soon. Matthew stood. Considering your offer, sir, if it's still open. It is. Davidson hung his robes on a hook. But I sense there's more to this visit. Sarah interjected. Mr. Hayes just informed me that Prescott men told him Judge Wilson is selling his ranch. Davidson's bushy eyebrows rose. Wilson said nothing of this to me. We played chess Wednesday evening. They claimed his health was failing, Matthew added, that he wanted to cash out. The judge exchanged a meaningful look with his daughter. Interesting timing. Sir? Matthew looked between them. Davidson seemed to reach a decision. Hayes, what I'm about to tell you requires discretion. My daughter and I have been investigating a series of questionable land transactions involving Prescott Enterprises and Montana Territorial Bank. Sarah mentioned it. What she couldn't mention is that we found evidence of altered loan documents, interest rates changed after signing, payment records lost by the bank, properties foreclosed despite borrowers being current on payments. Matthew's jaw tightened. That's theft. It's fraud, Davidson corrected. But proving it requires original documents signed by the borrowers. Documents the bank has been careful to destroy or alter. You think they're targeting Wilson's ranch now? It fits the pattern. Large property adjacent to existing Prescott holdings, elderly owner, valuable water rights. Davidson moved to a map on the wall showing land ownership across the county. Look here, every property in blue was acquired by Prescott in the last 2 years. Note the pattern. Matthew studied the map. The blue marked properties formed a rough corridor from the mountains to the plains, following the watershed. They're securing water access. Precisely. In Montana, whoever controls water controls everything. Davidson pointed to Wilson's property, marked in green. His ranch sits at a critical junction in the watershed. With it, Prescott would control water rights to half the county. Why tell me this? Because you've been a victim of their tactics, Davidson said bluntly. And because I need a clerk I can trust. Someone who understands what we're fighting. Matthew looked from the judge to Sarah, weighing his options. Challenging Prescott meant making powerful enemies. Walking away meant abandoning any chance at justice, not just for himself, but for others who'd lost everything. The position pays $40 monthly, Davidson continued. Includes room and board in the building next door. You'd start immediately. Taking this job would put me directly against Prescott and Sullivan, Matthew observed. Yes, it would. They'd see it as a betrayal. Matthew thought of Elizabeth, caught between loyalty to her father and her own sense of right. Make things difficult for everyone involved. Difficult times find us whether we seek them or not, Davidson replied. Question is whether we face them standing or kneeling. Matthew extended his hand. I'll take the position, Judge. Davidson's grip was firm despite his missing arm. Welcome aboard, Hayes. Be here at 8 tomorrow. Sarah will show you your duties. As Matthew left the courthouse, the weight of his decision pressed on him. He'd just allied himself with the man investigating Elizabeth's father for fraud. Crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Outside, the setting sun painted timberline in hues of amber and shadow. On the north side, the Prescott mansion rose like a fortress on the hill, windows glowing with early lamplight. So close in distance, yet separated by wealth, power, and now opposing sides of justice. Matthew mounted his horse for the ride back to Wilson's ranch. Tomorrow he would begin a new chapter, one that would either bring justice or cost him what little he had left. The Prescott mansion blazed with light, every window illuminated against the winter darkness. Carriages lined the circular drive, disgorging Montana Territory's elite for the engagement dinner. Territorial officials, bank directors, railroad executives, all come to witness the union of two powerful families. In her bedroom, Elizabeth stood motionless as her maid fastened the last buttons on her gown, an extravagant creation of blue silk and French lace that had arrived from New York barely hours before. The diamond ring weighed heavy on her finger. You look beautiful, miss, the maid said, adjusting a curl. Elizabeth barely heard her, lost in thoughts of the decision facing her. Downstairs, 70 guests awaited the formal announcement of her engagement to James Sullivan. Her father had already informed the territorial governor, who would make a toast. The newspaper editor had prepared a special edition. There seemed no way out that wouldn't create a scandal that would destroy her father. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Samuel Prescott entered, resplendent in evening wear, his silver hair and beard freshly trimmed. It's time, he said, offering his arm. Elizabeth took it mechanically. As they moved toward the hallway, Samuel paused. Your mother would be proud tonight, he said, voice softening briefly. She always wanted to see you secure and respected. Did she? Elizabeth met his gaze. Or did she want to see me happy? Samuel's expression closed again. They're the same thing, properly understood. They're not. You know they're not. Elizabeth lowered her voice. Father, I've heard things about Mr. Sullivan, about how he and the bank acquire properties. Samuel stiffened. Rumors spread by those who failed through their own incompetence. Judge Davidson doesn't strike me as incompetent. Davidson is a relic nursing old grievances. The war ended 20 years ago, but men like him keep fighting it in different arenas. Samuel's voice hardened. Whatever you've heard, dismiss it. Sullivan understands the future of this territory. Together, you'll build something lasting. At what cost? Elizabeth persisted. I spoke with Sarah Davidson yesterday. She showed me records of foreclosures across the county, patterns that seem deliberate. Samuel's face darkened. You went to Davidson's office? After I expressly forbade contact with that family? I wanted the truth. The truth is that business requires decisive action. Weak men call it ruthlessness. Strong men call it vision. He gripped her arm tighter. Now compose yourself. Our guests are waiting. The grand staircase descended into a foyer filled with Montana's power brokers, all eyes turning upward as they appeared. Elizabeth felt each gaze like a physical touch, expectations pressing from all sides. Sullivan waited at the bottom, handsome in his tailored suit, triumph barely concealed beneath his practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samuel announced as they reached the bottom, "thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion. Tonight we celebrate not just an engagement, but a partnership that will shape the future of Montana Territory." Applause rippled through the gathering. Sullivan stepped forward, taking Elizabeth's hand from her father's arm. His fingers felt cold against her skin. "Elizabeth has made me the happiest of men," Sullivan proclaimed. "Together we will build on the foundations laid by her distinguished father, creating opportunities that will benefit everyone in this territory." More applause. The territorial governor moved forward with his champagne glass raised. "To the future Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, may their union bring prosperity to all Montana." Glasses clinked. Elizabeth felt Sullivan's arms slide around her waist, possessive as he accepted congratulations. Through the crowd, she caught glimpses of faces she recognized. Judge Wilson, looking uncomfortable in formal attire. The banker who had foreclosed on the Hayes family farm, now corpulent with prosperity. The newspaper editor who printed what Prescott money dictated. And near the back, partly hidden by a column, Sarah Davidson. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Sarah gave an imperceptible nod, slipping something from her reticule, placing it on a side table near the door before quietly exiting. The evening progressed in a blur of toasts, music, and congratulations. Elizabeth performed her role flawlessly, smiling, thanking, accepting good wishes she didn't feel. When the last guest departed past midnight, she climbed the stairs to her room, exhausted beyond words. On her dressing table lay a folded note that hadn't been there before. Elizabeth opened it with trembling fingers. "Court records show your father knew the Hayes farm was current on payments when he ordered foreclosure. Matthew Hayes now works with us investigating these cases. If you wish to know more, come to the courthouse tomorrow at 10 a.m. Destroy this note. SD." Elizabeth stared at the words, their meaning burning through her exhaustion. Her father had deliberately taken the Hayes family farm, knowing they weren't in default. The same father who now insisted she marry Sullivan, architect of similar schemes across the county. She burned the note in the fire loam, watching the paper curl and blacken, taking with it her last illusions about her father's business practices. Morning couldn't come fast enough. Dawn found Matthew organizing documents in the courthouse records room. He'd spent half the night moving his meager possessions to the small apartment above the feed store, courtesy of Judge Davidson. Judge Wilson had accepted his resignation with regret, but understanding. "Good timing," Wilson had said. "Had a visit from Prescott yesterday, offered to buy the place. Said my health looked poor, and I should consider selling before winter's end." Matthew sorted through property deeds, organizing them chronologically as Sarah had instructed. The work was tedious, but revealing. Through these documents, a pattern emerged of Prescott's growing empire. Properties acquired through foreclosures and tax sales, always expanding along the watershed. "You've made progress." Sarah's voice came from the doorway. She carried a tray with coffee and biscuits. "Father says you have a talent for organization. Army teaches you to keep things orderly." Matthew accepted the coffee gratefully. "Found something interesting. Every property foreclosed had their loans serviced by the same bank officer, James Sullivan." Sarah nodded. Before he became Prescott's partner, Sullivan was chief loan officer at Montana Territorial Bank. He personally handled all these transactions. "That can't be coincidence." "It isn't." She hesitated. "I invited someone to join us this morning, someone who might help our investigation." Before Matthew could ask who, the outer door opened. Sarah stepped out, her voice lowered in conversation. Then she returned, Elizabeth Prescott beside her. Matthew stood quickly, surprise evident. Elizabeth wore a simple blue dress, hair pulled back, none of the finery he'd expect from an engagement dinner the night before. Their eyes met, and he saw conflict there, determination mixed with uncertainty. "Mr. Hayes?" Her voice was formal, controlled. "I understand you are working with Judge Davidson now." "Yes, ma'am. Started yesterday." Elizabeth turned to Sarah. "You mentioned documents, evidence." Sarah retrieved a folder from her desk. "These are copies of bank records my father obtained through court order. They show the original terms of loans made to several properties, including the Hayes family farm. Elizabeth took the folder, opening it carefully. And these prove fraud. They show discrepancies between what borrowers signed and what the bank claimed later. Interest rates altered, payment records changed. Sarah pointed to specific entries. In Mr. Hayes's case, the bank claimed 3 missed payments. These records show all payments received on time. Elizabeth's face paled as she examined the documents. My father's signature is on these authorization forms. Yes, as bank president, he approved each foreclosure. Matthew watched Elizabeth's expression shift as realization settled. Her father wasn't just associated with these actions. He directed them. There's more, Sarah continued. We believe Sullivan and your father are targeting Judge Wilson's ranch next. They've already approached him about selling. Elizabeth closed the folder. Why show me this? Because you need to understand what your future husband does. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. The prosperity built by Prescott Enterprises comes at the expense of families like Mr. Hayes's. Elizabeth turned to Matthew. Did you know I'd be here? No. He met her gaze steadily. I wouldn't have used you against your father, no matter what he's done. Yet you took this position, investigating him. I took it seeking truth. Matthew straightened. Your father took everything from my family. If he did the same to others, that truth deserves light. Elizabeth looked between them, decision crystallizing behind her eyes. What you're doing could destroy my father, his reputation, his business. Yes, Sarah acknowledged, it could. And my engagement to James Sullivan would become difficult to maintain. Elizabeth moved to the window, looking out at snow-covered timberline. When she turned back, resolution had replaced uncertainty. What do you need from me? Sarah exchanged a glance with Matthew. Access to your father's private records. Correspondence between him and Sullivan regarding these properties. Proof they knew the foreclosures were fraudulent. You're asking me to betray my father. I'm asking you to honor truth, Sarah replied, whatever the consequences. Elizabeth's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where the gold locket bearing the Prescott crest hung beneath her dress, the weight of legacy, of expectation, pressed against her heart. I need time to think, she returned the folder to Sarah. This isn't a simple decision. Of course. Sarah placed a hand briefly on Elizabeth's arm. Whatever you decide, this conversation remains between us. Elizabeth nodded, then looked at Matthew. May I speak with you privately, Mr. Hayes? Sarah tactfully withdrew to her father's office. When they were alone, Elizabeth moved closer to Matthew, voice lowered. Why didn't you tell me your farm was taken by my father's bank? Would it have mattered? In that cabin, during the storm, we were just 2 people, no names, no history. It matters now. Her eyes searched his. Everything matters now. Matthew hesitated, then spoke plainly. Your father took my family's land through fraud. That's the truth these documents show. But that doesn't change what happened between us. That was real too. What happened between us? Elizabeth faltered. I'm engaged to Sullivan now. The announcement was made formal last night. I heard. Congratulations. No bitterness in his voice, only resignation. It's not what I want. The admission came quietly, almost against her will. What do you want, Elizabeth? She looked away. Something impossible. A way forward that doesn't require betraying either my father or my conscience. Sometimes there's no clean path. Matthew's voice softened. Just the one that lets you face yourself in the mirror come morning. Elizabeth met his gaze again, something unspoken passing between them. Then she straightened, decision made. I'll help you, not to destroy my father, but to find the truth, whatever that means for all of us. The courthouse door banged open before Matthew could respond. Judge Davidson hurried in, face grave. Elizabeth, you need to leave, now. Sullivan and your father are on their way here. She paled. How do they know? Someone saw you enter. Word travels fast in Timberline. Elizabeth moved toward the back exit, but Davidson shook his head. Too late. They're coming up the steps. Hayes, get her into my chambers. Sarah, stall them. Matthew guided Elizabeth through the record room into Davidson's private office. They barely closed the door when voices echoed from the main chamber. Where is she? Samuel Prescott's demand carried clearly. Who, Mr. Prescott? Sarah's voice, calm and professional. My daughter. She was seen entering this building. Many people visit the courthouse, Sarah replied. Public records are available to all citizens. Don't play games, Miss Davidson. Sullivan's voice now, cold with anger. Is Elizabeth here or not? Through a crack in the door, Matthew could see Samuel Prescott's face, flushed with fury. Sullivan stood beside him, eyes scanning the room like a predator. Mr. Prescott, Mr. Sullivan. Judge Davidson's authoritative voice entered the exchange. This is a place of law, You will conduct yourselves accordingly or leave. My daughter has been influenced by your meddling, Samuel accused. First your clerk position offered to Hayes, now secret meetings with Elizabeth. You're trying to undermine me. If legitimate business practices can be undermined by truth, perhaps they deserve scrutiny, Davidson replied evenly. Sullivan stepped forward. Careful, Judge. Your position isn't beyond political pressure. The governor values his relationship with Prescott Enterprises. Are you threatening an elected official, Sullivan? Davidson's voice hardened. That would be unwise. Beside Matthew, Elizabeth listened, hand pressed to her mouth. The men she'd known all her life, father and fiancé, revealed in their raw ambition and willingness to threaten. Search the building, Samuel ordered. Elizabeth, if you're here, show yourself now. This childish behavior ends today. Davidson stepped forward, blocking the path to his chambers. You have no authority to search court offices, Prescott. I suggest you leave before this becomes a legal matter. The confrontation hung balanced on a knife edge. Matthew felt Elizabeth trembling beside him, torn between hiding and confronting her father. Very well, Samuel's voice lowered dangerously. But understand this, Davidson. Your investigation ends now. Any further actions against Prescott Enterprises will be met with the full force of our political and financial influence. Is that how justice works in your world, Prescott? Davidson challenged. Money dictates truth? Justice serves those strong enough to define it. Samuel's footsteps moved toward the door. Tell my daughter when you see her that her presence is required at home, immediately. The outer door slammed. Elizabeth sagged against Matthew. The weight of confrontation narrowly avoided pressing down on her. They know, she whispered. They know I'm helping you. We don't know that, Matthew reassured her. Could just be suspicion. Davidson opened his chamber door. They're gone, but they'll be watching the building now. Elizabeth can't leave without being seen. I need to go home, she said. Face my father directly. Hiding only confirms his suspicions. Not yet, Davidson counseled. Give them time to cool down. Sarah, take Elizabeth to your home through the back alley. She can rest there until we decide next steps. Sarah nodded, collecting her coat. Father's right. We need time to think this through. Elizabeth looked at Matthew, indecision clear in her eyes. This is happening so fast. Truth has a way of accelerating once it starts moving, Davidson observed. The question now is whether we control its direction or get swept along. As Sarah led Elizabeth toward the back exit, Matthew felt the ground shifting beneath them all. Lines had been drawn, sides chosen. A confrontation years in the making now moved toward its inevitable conclusion. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, dark against the morning sky. Another Montana blizzard approaching, mirroring the human storm building in Timberline. Matthew watched Elizabeth disappear down the alley with Sarah, two small figures against the looming weather. Some storms you rode out, others you faced head-on. This one, Matthew suspected, would require both courage and faith before it passed. The blizzard hit Timberline just after midnight, roaring down from the mountains like Judgment Day. Snow piled in drifts against buildings, wind howled through empty streets, and by dawn the town lay buried under 2 feet of fresh powder with more falling. Nature, indifferent to human schemes, had imposed a temporary truce on the brewing conflict. In the Davidson home, a modest 2-story clapboard house 3 blocks from the courthouse, Elizabeth Prescott stood at the window watching the storm. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. The weight of her decision pressed down like the snow outside, heavy and transforming. Sarah Davidson entered the small guest bedroom, carrying a tray with coffee and biscuits. At 25, Sarah had spent her life in her father's shadow, learning law and justice from a man who believed in both absolutely. She set the tray down and joined Elizabeth at the window. Father says the storm might last 2 days. Roads are already impassable. Elizabeth nodded, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. My father will be worried, angry. You could have gone home last night. And faced what? Ultimatums? Locked doors? Elizabeth sipped the coffee, bitter and honest compared to the fancy imported blends her father preferred. No, I need time to think. Sarah studied her, this woman from another world. Elizabeth's simple blue dress, borrowed after her engagement gown, proved impractical. Still couldn't disguise her bearing, the straight spine and lifted chin of privilege. What will you do, Sarah asked, when the storm passes? Elizabeth watched snowflakes swirl against the glass. The right thing. I just need to determine what that is. Is it right to protect a father who has taken so much from others? Is it right to destroy him? Elizabeth countered. He wasn't always this way. After my mother died, something changed. He became harder. as if accumulating wealth could fill the hole her absence left. Sarah moved to stoke the fire. My mother died when I was 12. Father lost his arm at Shiloh the same year. But loss didn't turn him cruel. Some men bend under weight, others break. Elizabeth turned from the window. I need to see all your evidence. Everything you and your father have gathered against Prescott Enterprises. If I'm to make this choice, I need to understand exactly what my father has done. Sarah hesitated. Father keeps those documents locked in his office safe. Then we need to speak with him. Elizabeth straightened, decision made. I won't hide in this room while others decide my future. I've done that long enough. Downstairs, Judge Davidson sat at his desk in the small study he maintained at home, reading court documents by lamplight. At 65, his face mapped the hard territory of his life, deep lines etched by sun, wind, and the war that had taken his arm. He looked up as the women entered, setting aside his papers. Miss Prescott, I trust you slept well? Not particularly, Judge. Elizabeth took the chair opposite his desk. I need to know everything you have uncovered about my father's business practices, all of it. Davidson studied her, weighing something. Why? Because I need to be certain before I act. Certain of what? That justice is what you seek, not revenge. Elizabeth met his gaze directly. That the evidence warrants the pain its revelation will cause. The judge's weathered face revealed nothing. And if I refuse, then I'll return home when the storm breaks and marry James Sullivan as planned. Because without certainty, loyalty to my father must prevail. The challenge hung in the air between them. Davidson glanced at his daughter, who nodded slightly. Then he stood, moved to a portrait of Abraham Lincoln hanging on the wall, and swung it aside to reveal a small wall safe. He dialed the combination, removed a thick leather portfolio, and placed it on the desk. Everything we've gathered over the past year. He pushed it toward Elizabeth. Court records, bank documents, witness statements. The complete pattern of fraud and intimidation. Elizabeth opened the portfolio with steady hands. Inside lay the systematic dismantling of her father's empire, page by documented page. For the next 3 hours, she read every sheet, asking occasional questions, making notes. The judge and Sarah remained, answering when needed, otherwise silent. Outside, the storm continued unabated, snow piling higher, wind rattling windows. Inside, a different kind of storm brewed as Elizabeth absorbed the full scope of her father's crimes. Finally, she closed the portfolio. Her face had grown paler, but her eyes remained clear. 23 families, she said quietly. 23 farms and ranches taken through altered documents, falsified records, and manufactured debt. Yes, Davidson's voice was gentle. All legal on paper, all fraudulent, in fact. And my future husband orchestrated most of it. Elizabeth's voice held no question, only bleak certainty. Sullivan was the architect. Your father provided the means. Elizabeth stood, moving to the window. Through gaps in the blowing snow, she could just make out the distant shape of the Prescott mansion on the hill, lights glowing against the white fury. What happens now, she asked, if these documents become public? Criminal charges against Sullivan, certainly. Your father would likely avoid prison due to his connections, but civil suits would claim much of his fortune. Davidson spoke matter-of-factly. Prescott Enterprises would collapse. Elizabeth absorbed this. And Matthew Hayes, what does he gain? Justice. Perhaps compensation for his lost property. Nothing can restore the years taken from him or the parents he buried after they lost everything. Elizabeth turned back. I'll help you, but I need something in return. Name it. A chance to confront my father privately before any public action. One opportunity to make him understand the damage he's done and offer him a path to make amends. Davidson considered this. That could be dangerous. Sullivan won't hesitate to destroy evidence if warned. I won't warn them. I'll simply speak to my father alone. Elizabeth's voice hardened. I owe him that much. Not for his sake, but for the man he was before greed consumed him. Very well, Davidson nodded. When the storm breaks, you'll have your chance, but we'll need safeguards in place. What kind of safeguards? Matthew Hayes will accompany you to the Prescott estate. He'll wait outside, but if you don't emerge within an hour or if you signal distress, he'll intervene. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. You trust him that much? I do. Davidson's voice left no room for doubt. Hayes is a man anchored by principle. Rare in any time, precious in ours. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Sarah moved to answer it, returning moments later with Matthew Hayes. Snow covered his hat and coat, his right leg dragging slightly as he stamped his boots on the entry rug. The bitter cold had aggravated his old war wound. "Judge," Matthew nodded respectfully. "Miss Prescott." Hayes, Davidson gestured him forward. "Didn't expect to see anyone moving in this storm. Came from the courthouse. Left some documents unfinished." Matthew's gaze moved to Elizabeth, concern evident. "Town's talking. Prescott's men are asking questions about Miss Prescott's whereabouts." "Let them ask," Davidson said. "The storm will keep them occupied for now." Elizabeth studied Matthew. Snow melted from his coat, forming a small puddle at his feet. His face showed exhaustion but determination. She wondered how far he had walked through the blizzard and why he had really come. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "would you escort me to the kitchen? I believe we could all use fresh coffee." In the kitchen, Elizabeth busied herself with the stove and coffee pot, aware of Matthew standing awkwardly by the door. When the water began to heat, she turned to face him. "You didn't come here about unfinished documents." Matthew removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "No, ma'am. You came to ensure I was safe." Seemed prudent. Sullivan isn't a man to accept defiance lightly. Elizabeth allowed a small smile. "I don't require protection, Mr. Hayes. I've navigated difficult men my entire life." Never suggested otherwise. He met her gaze. "But allies make any battle easier." The simple statement hung between them. Elizabeth felt something shift, boundaries blurring. In another life, another time, this man might have been someone entirely different to her. "I've decided to help Judge Davidson," she said, "to provide evidence against my father and James Sullivan." Matthew nodded, unsurprised. "Can't have been an easy choice." "It wasn't. Still isn't." She turned back to the stove as the water boiled. "But some debts must be paid, even by those who didn't incur them directly. Your father's debts aren't yours to pay, aren't they?" Elizabeth measured coffee into the pot. "I've lived in comfort while families like yours suffered. Enjoyed privileges purchased with others' misfortune. You didn't know." "Perhaps I didn't want to know." She poured the boiling water, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. "Willful ignorance isn't innocence, Mr. Hayes." They stood in silence as the coffee brewed. Outside, the storm howled, rattling the windows. Inside, in the warm kitchen, something unspoken grew between them, fragile as new grass. "After this is over," Matthew said finally, "what will you do?" Elizabeth hadn't considered the question. Her future had always been predetermined, mapped out by her father's expectations and society's demands. Freedom to choose was foreign territory. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I've known will be gone. My father disgraced, our family name tarnished, our position in society destroyed. Not everything worth having comes with a pedigree." Matthew's voice remained gentle. "Some things grow better in humble soil." Elizabeth looked up, found him watching her with eyes that had seen too much suffering to judge harshly. She realized he wasn't speaking of her circumstances, but offering something more profound: understanding, forgiveness, perhaps even a future, though neither of them could name it yet. "The coffee's ready," she said, breaking the moment. "We should join the others." They returned to the study, where Davidson was showing his daughter another document from the portfolio. The judge looked up as they entered, accepting the coffee Elizabeth offered. "Hayes, we've reached a decision. When the storm breaks, Miss Prescott will return home to confront her father privately. She'll attempt to convince him to make restitution before we take legal action." Matthew frowned. "Alone? That's not safe." "Not entirely alone. You'll accompany her to the estate, remain outside, and intervene if necessary." Matthew's gaze shifted to Elizabeth. "You're certain about this?" "I am. My father deserves one chance to make this right. And if he refuses, then justice will take its course." Her voice held no wavering now. "But first, I need to look him in the eye and ask why. Why he betrayed everything my mother valued. Why he became the kind of man he once despised." Matthew nodded slowly. "I'll be there, whatever you need." The day passed slowly, the storm showing no signs of abating. Elizabeth helped Sarah prepare a simple dinner, the two women finding unexpected common ground despite their different backgrounds. Judge Davidson reviewed court documents, preparing the legal case that would shake Montana territory to its foundations. Matthew repaired a loose shutter that had been rattling in the wind, his practical nature seeking problems to solve. By evening, the house had become a sanctuary of shared purpose, the four unlikely allies bound by commitment to justice and truth. After dinner, as Davidson and Sarah discussed legal strategies, Elizabeth found Matthew in the small back parlor, staring into the fireplace. She sat beside him, watching the flames dance. "Judge Davidson thinks the storm might break by morning," she said. Matthew nodded. "Weather shifts fast in these mountains. Clear skies can follow the worst blizzards within hours." Are you afraid, she asked suddenly, of what's coming? He considered the question. Not afraid, concerned. Your father and Sullivan have power, connections, won't surrender easily. They've never faced someone with nothing left to lose. Elizabeth's voice held new steel. That's their weakness. They believe everyone has a price, a vulnerability that can be exploited. Everyone does. Matthew looked at her. Even me, even you. What's yours, Mr. Hayes? His gaze returned to the fire. Lost it already? Can't lose the same thing twice. Your family's land. No, though that cut deep enough. He fell silent, and Elizabeth understood he wouldn't elaborate further. Some wounds remain too personal to share, even in moments of unexpected intimacy. I should rest, she said finally. Tomorrow will demand strength from us all. Matthew nodded. Good night, Miss Prescott. Elizabeth, she corrected. After all this, I think we've earned the right to our Christian names. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, Matthew. She climbed the stairs to the guest room, aware that tomorrow would end one chapter of her life and begin another, its contents yet unwritten. The storm broke before dawn, clouds parting to reveal stars bright as diamonds in the black Montana sky. By sunrise, the world sparkled under fresh snow, pristine and renewed. Timberline emerged like a town in a fairy tale, buildings capped in white, smoke rising straight from chimneys in the still cold air. Elizabeth dressed in her borrowed clothes, simple and practical compared to her usual finery. Sarah had offered her a heavy wool coat, essential protection against the bitter cold. As she fastened the buttons, Elizabeth caught her reflection in the small mirror. She looked different, stronger. The woman staring back was no longer merely Samuel Prescott's daughter, but someone forging her own identity through difficult choices. Downstairs, Judge Davidson, Sarah, and Matthew waited in the kitchen. They had been discussing strategy, falling silent as Elizabeth entered. The judge nodded approval at her appearance, practical and determined. The roads are being cleared, he said. By noon, travel will be possible again. I should leave sooner, Elizabeth replied. On horseback, before my father sends men to search for me. I've saddled 2 horses, Matthew confirmed. They can manage the snow if we're careful. Davidson handed Elizabeth a small Derringer pistol. Take this, just in case. She hesitated, then accepted the weapon, tucking it into her coat pocket. I won't need it. My father would never harm me, whatever his other failings. Sullivan might not share those scruples, the judge warned. Be vigilant. Final preparations were made quickly. Matthew would accompany Elizabeth to the Prescott estate, remaining hidden but close. If she didn't emerge within 1 hour, or if she signaled distress by drawing the curtains in her father's study, he would intervene. Meanwhile, Judge Davidson would prepare the legal documents necessary to move against Prescott Enterprises, filing them only after Elizabeth's confrontation. They left through the back door, Matthew leading 2 horses through snow-filled streets. Few people were about yet, most still digging out from the storm. They reached the edge of town without incident, then mounted and rode toward the Prescott estate on the hill overlooking Timberline. The journey took longer than usual, horses struggling through knee-deep snow. Elizabeth rode slightly ahead, her mind rehearsing what she would say to her father. Not accusations, but questions. Not judgment, but an appeal to the man he had once been. They stopped at the tree line bordering Prescott property. The mansion stood 200 yards away, windows glowing with early morning light. Matthew dismounted, helping Elizabeth down from her horse. 1 hour, he reminded her. If you're not out by then, I'm coming in. Elizabeth nodded, suddenly aware that this might be the last time she would see her childhood home with the same eyes. After today, everything would change. Thank you, she said, not just for this, but for showing me what integrity looks like when tested. Matthew looked uncomfortable with the praise. Just doing what needs doing. Few men can claim as much. Elizabeth impulsively touched his arm. Whatever happens, I won't regret this choice. She turned and walked through the snow toward the mansion, back straight, head high. Matthew watched until she reached the front door, then led the horses deeper into the trees to wait and watch. Elizabeth entered her home using her key, surprised to find no servants visible in the main hall. Usually by this hour, the house would be bustling with activity. She removed her borrowed coat, hanging it in the entryway, then made her way to her father's study. The door was closed, but light showed beneath it. She knocked firmly. Enter, Samuel Prescott's voice, tired but commanding. Elizabeth opened the door to find her father at his desk, still wearing clothes from the previous day, clearly having worked through the night. Papers covered the normally immaculate surface. He looked up, surprise giving way to relief, then hardening to anger. Elizabeth? He stood. 2 days, no word. Do you have any idea the worry you've caused? I needed time to think, she replied calmly. The storm provided it. Think about what? Running away from your obligations? Embarrassing this family before the entire territory? His voice rose. Where have you been? That doesn't matter now. Elizabeth closed the door behind her. We need to talk, Father, about Montana Territorial Bank, about foreclosures, about James Sullivan. Samuel went very still. What nonsense has Davidson been filling your head with? Not nonsense, evidence. Elizabeth moved to the chair opposite his desk but remained standing. 23 properties taken through fraud, altered loan documents, falsified payment records. Your signature authorizing it all. Business practices you couldn't possibly understand. Samuel's face flushed. The bank simply protected its interests against unreliable borrowers. Borrowers like the Hayes family, who made every payment on time, only to have their record altered after the fact. Samuel's eyes narrowed. So that's it? You've developed some romantic notion about that ranch hand, and now you're throwing away your future based on his sob story. This isn't about Matthew Hayes, it's about you. Elizabeth's voice remained steady. The man who raised me to believe in honesty and fairness. The man who once said character matters more than profit. What happened to him, Father? He grew up, realized the world rewards strength, not sentiment. Samuel moved to the window, looking out at his snow-covered estate. Everything I've built, I built for you. A legacy that would secure your future. And this is how you repay me? Consorting with my enemies? They're only your enemies because you made them so. Elizabeth joined him at the window. Judge Davidson has evidence sufficient for criminal charges against Sullivan and civil suits against you, but I convinced him to give me this chance to speak with you privately first. Samuel turned, genuine surprise on his face. Why would you do that? Because I remember the father you were before Mother died. The man who taught me to ride, who read to me every night, who believed in something beyond ledger books and profit margins. Elizabeth's voice softened. That man deserves one chance to make this right. Make what right? Business is business. Theft is theft, whether done with a gun or a pen. Elizabeth met his gaze. You have a choice, Father. Make restitution to the families you've wronged, or face public disgrace and financial ruin when Davidson files his case. Samuel stared at her, seeing for the first time not his obedient daughter, but a woman of principle and courage. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in his eyes, as if he glimpsed his dead wife in Elizabeth's resolve. You would destroy your own family name? Everything I've built? Samuel's eyes drifted to Sarah's portrait on the wall. For a moment, he seemed to see her not as oil and canvas, but as she had been, vibrant, principled, uncompromising in her belief that wealth meant nothing without honor. Your mother once told me something I've spent 20 years trying to forget, he said quietly. She said a man who sacrifices his integrity for security ends up with neither. He touched the frame gently. I thought I was building a legacy for you. Instead, I've been dismantling everything she valued. To save what remains of your honor, yes. Elizabeth took his hand. It's not too late. Return the properties. Make financial amends. You'll still be wealthy, just not obscenely so. Samuel pulled away, moving back to his desk. And Sullivan, what becomes of your engagement? There is no engagement. Not anymore. Elizabeth touched the place where the diamond ring had been, removed the night before. I won't marry a man who builds fortune on others' misery. Samuel sat heavily in his chair, the weight of consequence finally penetrating his defenses. For several minutes he said nothing, staring at the papers before him. When he looked up, his face had aged a decade. Sarah would be ashamed of what I've become, he said finally, referring to his dead wife. She always saw the best in people. I see only what can be used. It's not too late to change that view, Elizabeth pressed. Make amends. Begin again. The door opened before Samuel could respond. James Sullivan entered without knocking. His tailored suit immaculate, his face controlled, but eyes burning with barely suppressed rage. Elizabeth, how convenient to find you here. His voice carried false warmth. Your father and I have been quite concerned. Elizabeth turned to face him, keeping the desk between them. Mr. Sullivan, I was just explaining to my father that our engagement is ended. Sullivan's smile never wavered, though his eyes hardened further. A decision made in haste and confusion, surely. After we speak privately, I'm certain you'll reconsider. There's nothing to discuss, Elizabeth replied. I've made my choice. Sullivan looked to Samuel. Perhaps you might remind your daughter of her obligations, Samuel. To family, to propriety, to contracts signed. Samuel Prescott stood slowly, something shifting in his bearing. For 20 years he had allowed grief to harden him, ambition to blind him. Now faced with his daughter's courage, something long dormant stirred back to life. My daughter makes her own choices, James. His voice held new resolve, as do I. Sullivan's facade cracked slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying our business arrangement requires review. Immediately. Samuel straightened to his full height. Elizabeth has brought certain irregularities to my attention. Banking practices I apparently authorized but never fully examined. Sullivan's face darkened. Banking is my domain. You've always trusted my judgment in such matters. A trust, perhaps misplaced. Samuel's voice hardened. Were loan documents altered under your direction, James? Were legitimate payments ignored to facilitate foreclosures? Absurd. Sullivan looked from father to daughter. She's been listening to Davidson and that cowboy, filling her head with lies. Court records don't lie, Elizabeth interjected. Nor do the 23 families who lost everything while Prescott Enterprises grew fat on their misfortune. Sullivan's control finally broke. He slammed his fist on the desk. Those people were weak, undeserving. We built something lasting from land they would have squandered. The naked greed in his voice hung in the air, damning in its honesty. Samuel stepped back as if physically struck, seeing his partner clearly for the first time. My God, he whispered, what have we done? Sullivan regained his composure quickly, straightening his jacket. What successful men have always done. Seized opportunity where others faltered. He turned to Elizabeth. This romantic notion of justice is charming, but impractical. The papers are already drawn up for our marriage. The governor himself witnessed our engagement. You will honor that commitment. Or what? Elizabeth challenged. Or your father faces ruin. Sullivan's voice lowered dangerously. I have documents with his signature authorizing every transaction. If I fall, he falls with me. Samuel moved to his daughter's side. Then I fall, but not before making what amends I can. Sullivan stared at them both, then laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. How touching, father and daughter united in righteous poverty. He moved toward the door. You have until noon to reconsider, Elizabeth. After that, I filed dissolution papers on Prescott Enterprises, naming your father as principal in all questionable transactions. He left, the door closing softly behind him. More dangerous than if he had slammed it. Elizabeth turned to her father. He'll destroy evidence, try to shift all blame to you. Let him try. Samuel moved to his safe, dialing the combination. I've kept my own records. Insurance, I called it. Protection against unforeseen circumstances. He removed a thick folder, handing it to Elizabeth. Every transaction, every property. Sullivan's instructions in his own handwriting. My authorizations. Dates, amounts, alterations. Everything Davidson would need to build a case. Elizabeth stared at the folder, a surefire folder, then at her father. You knew all along? I suspected, chose not to confirm. Samuel's face showed genuine remorse. After your mother died, nothing seemed to matter except building something lasting. Something that couldn't be taken away like she was. Sullivan offered a path to that security, and I took it without examining the cost. And now we face that cost together. He straightened his shoulders. Take this to Davidson. Tell him I'm prepared to testify against Sullivan and make full restitution to all affected families. There's something else, Samuel said, opening a drawer and removing a small journal. For the past year, I've been documenting Sullivan's excesses, things that troubled me but that I justified in the name of business. He handed it to Elizabeth. Perhaps I was waiting for someone to force me to confront what I'd become. Elizabeth felt tears threaten, unexpected emotion welling up. Not joy exactly, but vindication. The father she remembered still existed beneath the hardened exterior. It won't be easy, she warned. Your reputation, your position in society, worth nothing compared to your respect. Samuel took her hand. Your mother would be proud of you today. I am too, though I've no right to be. A movement outside the window caught Elizabeth's attention. Matthew Hayes stood at the edge of the tree vines watching the house, his hour nearly up, prepared to intervene if needed. She moved to the window, giving him a small wave to indicate she was safe. He nodded once, relief visible even at this distance. Your cowboy? Samuel asked, following her gaze. Not mine, Elizabeth replied, but a good man who deserves justice. Samuel nodded slowly. Then let's see he gets it, him and all the others. They left the study together, Samuel Prescott carrying the evidence of his own crimes, prepared at last to face their consequences. Outside, the winter sun sparkled on fresh snow, bright and cleansing. A new day, in more ways than one. That evening, after meeting with Judge Davidson, Samuel returned to his study alone. The room that had witnessed countless business triumphs now felt hollow. He methodically removed his gold cufflinks, his expensive watch, setting them on the desk, symbols of success that had become shackles. He poured himself a small glass of brandy, then stopped, setting it aside untouched. For the first time in decades, he wanted clarity, not comfort. Through the window, he could see lights in town, homes of people he'd wronged. Tomorrow would bring disgrace, financial ruin, the collapse of everything he'd built. Yet as he stood there, Samuel felt something unexpected. Not peace exactly, but the absence of weight. Like a man who had carried a burden so long, he'd forgotten how to stand straight without it. "Well, Sarah," he whispered to the empty room, "it seems our daughter is more your child than mine after all. Thank God for that." Spring came late to Montana territory that year. April found patches of snow still clinging to shadowed places, though green shoots pushed through the softening earth, stubborn and determined. In Timberline, change had come as dramatically as the seasons. James Sullivan faced trial on multiple counts of fraud and evidence tampering. His attempts to flee the territory had been thwarted by Judge Davidson's swift action, freezing his assets and issuing warrants before Sullivan could reach the railroad. Now he awaited sentencing. His empire collapsed, his name synonymous with corruption. Samuel Prescott had avoided criminal charges in exchange for full cooperation and restitution. The Prescott mansion had been sold to cover payments to the families wronged by the bank's practices. Samuel himself had moved to a modest house in town, working to rebuild not his fortune, but his character. A week after Sullivan's trial, Samuel encountered Matthew outside the courthouse. The two men regarded each other awkwardly, the weight of history between them. "Mr. Hayes," Samuel nodded, his bearing changed from the imperious banker of months past. "I understand you've reclaimed your family property." "Yes, sir," Matthew replied simply. Samuel hesitated, then extended his hand. "No apology can restore the years taken from you. But I want you to know that of all the wrongs I've committed, what happened to your family haunts me most." Matthew studied the offered hand, then took it briefly. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but acknowledgement. "A man's judged not just by his mistakes," he said quietly, "but by how he makes them right." Samuel nodded, understanding the measured grace being extended. "Elizabeth speaks highly of your plans for the farm. Simple plans, honest work." "The best kind," Samuel replied, and meant it. Judge Wilson had weathered the storm as well, in his own way. Sullivan's plan to acquire his ranch had been exposed before any papers could be signed. With Davidson's legal assistance, Wilson had formalized an agreement protecting his water rights and property boundaries. He'd chosen to stay in Timberline after all, finding renewed purpose in mentoring younger ranchers. He'd even offered Matthew occasional work when needed, though he understood Hayes was focused on rebuilding his own family legacy now. The elderly judge had become a regular at Davidson's chess matches, the two veterans finding common ground beyond their differing war allegiances. On a bright April morning, Matthew Hayes stood on a familiar piece of land, his land, returned to him as part of the restitution. 20 acres his grandfather had cleared, the small farmhouse his father had built, now his again by right and law. The buildings needed repair after 5 years of neglect, but the soil remained rich, the water clear, the possibility tangible. He knelt, taking a handful of earth, letting it run through his fingers. Land that had known his family's sweat and blood, that held his parents' graves on the small rise behind the house. Land he had thought lost forever. The sound of approaching hooves made him stand, brushing dirt from his hands. Elizabeth Prescott rode toward him, dressed practically in a simple riding skirt and jacket. She had changed in the past months, shedding the trappings of wealth for a simpler life, though her natural grace remained undiminished. She dismounted, tying her horse to the broken fence that marked the property line. "It looks different in spring," she observed. "Hopeful." Matthew nodded. "Good soil. With work, it'll produce again by fall." "Judge Davidson approved the last restitution payment yesterday," Elizabeth said. "All 23 families have received their due with interest." Your father kept his word. He did. Pride touched her voice. It hasn't been easy for him. Starting over at 60, facing former friends who now turn away. But I've seen glimpses of the man he was before, the father I remembered. They walked together toward the old farmhouse, its weathered boards solid despite years of emptiness. Matthew had begun repairs already, replacing broken windows, mending the porch step. Will you rebuild here? Elizabeth asked. Yes, simple at first, just what I need to get through winter. Matthew surveyed the property, seeing not what was, but what could be. Next spring I'll add to it, maybe plant some apple trees along the south field. Apple trees take years to bear fruit. Some things are worth waiting for. He looked at her then directly without pretense. How about you, still working at the school? Elizabeth nodded. 3 days a week teaching reading and mathematics. The rest of my time helping Sarah Davidson with court documentation. Judge says I have a talent for organization. They had reached the porch. Matthew gestured to the steps, and they sat side by side, looking out over the land that stretched before them, green with promise. Town's still talking, he said after a while, about you, about choices you've made. Let them talk. Elizabeth's voice held no regret. I've heard enough whispers to last a lifetime. They matter less each day. Matthew studied her profile, the determined chin, the clear eyes that saw the world as it was yet worked toward what it could be. In the months since the Sullivan trial, he had come to know her beyond the dramatic circumstances of their first meeting. Her strength, her quiet humor, her willingness to begin again without resentment. I'm heading to Helena next week, he said. Need supplies that Weber can't provide. Seed, tools, lumber for repairs. A long journey alone. Thought maybe you might want to come along. The invitation came out gruffly, uncertain. If you've no other obligations. Elizabeth looked at him, surprised. To Helena. Town that size, people don't know your history, don't care about names or fortunes lost. Matthew focused on the distant mountains. Just two people traveling together, nothing more complicated than that. The offer hung between them. Not quite a declaration, but a beginning. A door opened that both could choose to walk through. Elizabeth smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. I'd like that, very much. They sat in comfortable silence as the spring breeze moved across the land, carrying the scent of new growth and possibility. Behind them stood a house waiting to become a home again. Before them stretched fields ready for planting. And between them, something fragile and strong taking root, like the first shoots of wheat pushing through Montana soil after the long winter's sleep. Some legacies were written in bank ledgers and property deeds. Others in the quiet choices made when principle met opportunity. The most enduring were written in the heart, passed from one generation to the next through example rather than inheritance. As the afternoon sun warmed the old porch, Elizabeth reached out, briefly touching Matthew's hand. He turned his palm upward, their fingers interlocking without fanfare or declaration. A simple connection, honest as the land beneath their feet. In the distance, the mountains stood silent witness, unchanged by human schemes or seasons. They had seen empires rise and fall, fortunes made and lost, love found in unlikely circumstances. They would see it all again, countless times over countless years, but perhaps never with quite the same quiet dignity as the woman who had surrendered wealth for principle and the man who had refused to surrender principle even when all else was lost. Some storms came suddenly, transforming landscapes overnight. Others worked slowly, wearing away false foundations until only truth remained. Both were necessary in their time and season. The distant church bell in Timberline rang 4 times, marking the hour. Matthew and Elizabeth remained on the porch of the farmhouse that had once been lost and now was found, 2 figures against the vast Montana sky, planning not an empire but a life. Simple, honest, theirs.